Charlie Mitchell from Birmingham, England, he challenged JOHNL Sullivan for the bare knuckle heavyweight title in 1888. It was a big ring, which was to Charlie's advantage. He was faster and smaller. After 2 hours of slogging it out, the fight was declared a draw. Charlie was arrested after this fight and had to spend some time in a cell and was fined. This was in France, this fight. This was the second meeting between the two men. Sullivan somehow avoided being locked up. Mitchell came back to England a hero, and his supporters and fans, they made him his own belt. Here's Charlie's belt. You can see the Union Jack and the Star Spangled Banner, made from British sterling and velvet, and in the center plate to commemorate Charlie's performance. Charlie often faced men who were bigger than him, and Sullivan outweighed him considerably. In 1889, which I will say is the last major bare-knuckle clash before the Queensberry rules became the more prestigious option over bare-knuckle, Jake Kilrain challenged JOHNL Sullivan. The fight was fought under the old London prize ring rules, which meant a fight to the finish. There was no limit to the number of rounds that could be fought. No judges. Under these rules, fights ended when one man could no longer continue, either by being counted out or he simply couldn't carry on. Rounds were not timed. They only ended when one man went down, and as such, they could be much longer than the modern day 3 minutes, or much shorter. Rest periods between rounds were 30 seconds, not 60. The bouts were fought on turf instead of the modern day boxing ring, though the space in which the fights were conducted were roped off in a similar fashion to the Queensberry rules. Sullivan and Kilrain went 75 rounds, lasting 2 hours and 16 minutes before the matter was resolved. Sullivan was declared the winner and still champion. The bout took place in Richburg, USA. Jake Kilrain was also the recipient of a belt that a journalist had made for him before he challenged Sullivan. Sullivan, feeling left out, where's his belt? Eventually, a belt was made for Sullivan. 14 karat gold, 397 diamonds that spelt his name. It was later sold at an auction for $55,000, which they said was pretty cheap. The belt cost $10,000 to make. In 1891, the National Sporting Club was formed in Covent Garden, London. You also had the Wonderland, East End of London, and you had the Cosmo in Plymouth, which is outside London, let's say West Country, or is that the Southwest? I'm not sure. I call it West Country. They were all boxing clubs, and they had boxers at different weights, and they would claim their top boxers at a particular weight was the champion of Britain. Now, the Wonderland and the Cosmo were rival clubs. The National Sporting Club, they reigned. They outlasted the Cosmo. They outlasted the Wonderland. They started off with the Lord Lonsdale Challenge belt. That's the first lineal belt in boxing. That was later changed to the Lonsdale belt as it is still known today. So, flyweight, bantamweight, featherweight, lightweight, welterweight, middleweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight were the 8 weight classes the National Sporting Club decided on. The conditions of being a belt holder is that the champion has to defend his belt within 6 months of being champion. For a minimum stake of £100, 200 for heavyweight and 50 for flyweight. Before each defense, the champion had to deposit the belt with the National Sporting Club and insure the belt for £200 against loss, damage and fire. The belt can be won outright after 3 winning fights. On the 8th of November 1909, Freddie Welsh at the National Sporting Club Covent Garden became the first winner of one of these belts, beating Johnny Summers over 20 rounds on points. The fight nearly never happened because there was arguments between the two camps about who would get the money from cinema rights, who would get to control who was taking bets on the fight. Politics, just like modern day boxing. Freddie Welsh wasn't that interested in the Lonsdale belt because there was bigger money in America. He fought PACKEY McFarland for the world title 1 fight later at the National Sporting Club, and it was a draw over 20 rounds. PACKEY McFarland at the time was 59 1-3, 59 wins, 1 loss and 3 draws. Indeed a legendary fighter. Freddie boxes for the majority in America. He debuted in America in 2006, came back in 2007 where he fought Seaman Hayes. He fought him a couple of times. One of them fights is actually online on Steve Lott's channel. But he bounces back and forth from England to America and Canada. He wins the European title a couple of times in the UK, loses it to Matt Wells, beats Matt Wells. He's fought the likes of Benny Leonard, beats him, loses to him a couple of times. Adwal Gast is beaten. All top names are beaten. Johnny Dundee makes a whole load of money out of America, basically. So, a legendary British fighter in his own right. Not mentioned much, but the record speaks for itself. Now, Freddie Welsh was a special case, I guess because he was such a good fighter. The National Sporting Club let him keep the belt by default without defending it. And from what I hear, the belt was last seen being offered to the winner of a world lightweight title in 1931. So I'm trying to do some detective work to find out who that could be. Now, the New York State Athletic Commission title went out of commission after Rocky Kansas had it in 1925 until Bo Jack had it in 1942. Now, I'm not seeing the NBA title come up, but Tony Canzoneri had the belt all throughout 1931. He beat Al Singer for the belt in 1930, defended against Johnny Farr, Joey Kaufman, Sammy Fuller, Tommy Grogan, Jack Kid Berg. For some reason, he's been allowed to defend the world lightweight title and the junior welterweight title simultaneously in some of these defenses. In 1931, Tony Canzoneri defeated Jack Kid Berg to become the first junior welterweight champion. I found it. Tony Canzoneri versus Kid Chocolate. He won custody of the Lonsdale belt, originally awarded to Freddie Welsh. That's a mystery, that one. That's a mystery. I done some digging on Kid Chocolate. He was allowed as well to defend his featherweight title and the junior lightweight title simultaneously. Now, the junior lightweight title, that was probably quite new in the game as well. So, similar to Canzoneri, they just let him defend both simultaneously, but, have to do some digging on that one as well. Great fighter, the Cuban, though, Kid Chocolate. And he lost to Canzoneri on a split. It was tight. That would have made him a free-weight champion. Canzoneri is one of the first multiple weight champion fighters in the history of the game. Bantamweight, featherweight, lightweight, light welterweight. I solved the mystery anyway. Tony Canzoneri, who as far as I know has no United Kingdom ties at all. Great fighter though. Great fighter. Now all these great fighters I've mentioned, Kid Chocolate, Tony Canzoneri, PACKEY McFarland, legendary fighters. As far as I know, they didn't have sanctioning belts, they just had titles. February 1929, the British Boxing Board of Control replaces the National Sporting Club. They still keep Lord Lonsdale, they've got his portrait in the centre plate of the belt. The original belt was 9-carat gold. The board replaced that with hallmark silver. Henry Cooper won 3 Lonsdale belts in the heavyweight class, and the British Boxing Board of Control put an end to that. You can only win 1 per weight class now. Henry won 3. I think he was one of the last people to get a 9-carat Lonsdale belt. In 1993, at the age of 59, Henry invested heavily in the Lloyd's insurance market and lost big time. And he was forced to sell his belts for £42,000. He was hoping to get $70,000, but you can't live day to day off the belts, can you? I guess, The first of the belts to go was the only one made of gold. That's the one I'm talking about, the 9-carat one. It was made in 1936 and won for the first time the following year by the great Tommy Farr, who took Joe Louis the distance. It was won outright by Henry in 1959 after he beat Brian London on points at Earl's Court. That one alone sold for $22,000. The other 2 he won in 1964 and 1967 went for £10,000 each. Henry is the only fighter in the history of British boxing to have won 3 Lonsdale belts outright. In 2014, there were some belts, significant belts, that were auctioned off. in the United Kingdom. There was a silver belt won by a Birmingham-born boxer. I'm talking about Birmingham, England. His name was Jem Carney in 1987. This was a lightweight bout, and he fought the American Jack McAuliffe for the American Holsk International Challenge title. The bout was stopped and declared a draw after more than 4 hours, with both fighters being awarded the belt. This historical fight took place in Revere, Massachusetts, US of A, and the belt was auctioned off for £7,000. Now, Randolph Turpin, former middleweight champion, nicknamed the Leamington Liquor after his hometown of Leamington Spa in Warwickshire. After winning 3 British middleweight title fights during the 1950s and defeating Sugar Ray Robinson at Earl's Court to win the world title, the Boxing News awarded him a belt after he was voted the fighter to make the biggest contribution to British boxing that year, 1951. Very interesting. Now, as a devoted consumer of the Boxing News magazines, this has particular interest to me. And I wondered if there was any other boxers awarded these Boxing News belts. Was this just a one-off or a regular occurrence? Turpin also won a Lonsdale belt at light heavyweight, a 9-carat gold Lonsdale belt, and that was auctioned off for £23,000 in the year 2000. And the person who bought it came from the same town as Turpin, Leamington Spa, and he said he was considering putting the belt back on display in Leamington Spa. He grew up there and he met Randolph Turpin, and Turpin was a legend to him. 4th of July 1919, Jack Dempsey knocks out Jess Willard to become heavyweight champion, Bayview Park Arena, Toledo. The first belt he receives is in 1922 from the Ring magazine. He's the first to get a Ring magazine belt, and the flyweight champion Poncho Villa was the second. Now in 1942, Errol Flynn stars in a film called Gentleman Jim. It's about the life of James J. Corbett, the former heavyweight champion. Now, he beat John L. Sullivan to usher in the Marquess of Queensberry rules era of boxing. In the film, it shows John L. Sullivan turning up to this do where it seems like Corbett is hosting this big banquet, this big do. And he brings his belt with him and says, "You beat me fair and square." He's got a broad Irish accent, whoever's playing Sullivan. And he gives him the belt. I've done some more research on that years back, and the evidence is telling me that that was just fictional, that was made up to make the storyline a little more interesting, Hollywood style. In Joe Louis's first defense of the world title in 1937, he defeats Tommy Farr at the Yankee Stadium. Tommy Farr is a British fighter from Wales. Louis won by unanimous decision over 15 rounds. Very credible performance by Tommy Farr. Joe Louis now had the Ring magazine belt, but after he defeated Tommy Farr, the British Boxing Board of Control actually made Joe Louis a belt. I guess because he beat the British champion. The British Boxing Board of Control actually wanted Tommy Farr to fight Max Schmeling for the European belt. But Tommy done the right thing and got on the plane and took on Joe Louis. Here we see Joe Louis pictured with Henry Armstrong, helping him adjust the 2 belts that the Ring magazine awarded him. Now he's only got 2 belts on his person here, so I'm assuming that's the featherweight title that he won from Pete Cerrone in October the 29th, 1937, and the lightweight title that he won from Lou Ambers in 1938. He held both these belts simultaneously and added the welterweight belt, destroying Barney Russ in 1938 also. He's the first man to hold 3 world titles simultaneously. Now, doing this video, we've already went through the records of Kid Chocolate and Tony Canzoneri. They both held titles simultaneously as well. Not belts, titles simultaneously. Canzoneri had the junior welterweight title and a lightweight title. Kid Chocolate, he had the featherweight title and the junior lightweight title. But Armstrong is the first anyway to hold 3 titles and belts simultaneously. Armstrong did challenge Seferino Garcia for the middleweight title, even though that was only recognized by the California State Athletic Commission. He got a draw. He weighed in for that fight at 142. Seferino Garcia, he weighed in at 153. the Ring magazine did not recognize Garcia as a Ring magazine champion. This was on the 1st of March 1940 at the Gilmore Stadium, Los Angeles, California. Some people seem to think that the Ring magazine and lineal title is synonymous, and it's not. The Ring magazine are not a sanctioning body, just like the lineal title does not have a sanctioning body. The Ring magazine is a magazine. If the Ring magazine was synonymous with the lineal title, well, there's no reason why they wouldn't recognize Seferino Garcia. For whatever reason, they didn't recognize him. Because he passed on lineage to Ken Overland. He lost that belt to Ken Overland, the New York State Athletic Commission World Middleweight title. He lost that to Ken Overland in 1940. He won the belt from Fred Aspostoli, a very good middleweight, but was knocked out by Seferino Garcia in 1939. So the Ring are not totally impartial or transparent. They have their agendas and their motives. Where else you want to go with it? Ezra Charles became world champion in 1949, outpointing Jersey Joe Walcott after Joe Louis retired as heavyweight champion in 1948. Now, there is a considerable amount of press who don't recognize Ezra Charles as champion. The New York State Athletic Commission, they don't really recognize him. Europe doesn't recognize him. They try and make their own bogus belt. The press, they're not convinced. When he fights the likes of Pat Valentino defending his belt, only 6,000 people turn up. Ezra defends his title against Gus Lesnovich. The New York State Athletic Commission do not recognize the bout. When he finally beats Joe Louis, who comes back in 1950, then he gets the recognition that he deserves as full heavyweight champion. Around this time period, the New York State Athletic Commission drift out of boxing. They resurface when Joe Frazier beats Buster Mathis in 1968 at Madison Square Garden for the vacant title. This is a response to Muhammad Ali being stripped of his belts because he was in opposition to the government with his stance on the Vietnam War. So the New York State Athletic Commission were being very opportunistic in trying to create a successor, a champion in Ali's absence. Another key player in an attempt to find a successor to Ali was Jimmy Ellis. In 1967, he fights an elimination bout to qualify for the WBA tournament in Ali's absence, and he wins that by TKOing Leotis Martin in 9. He outpoints Oscar Bonavena, floors him twice. The iron-jawed Bonavena floored by Jimmy Ellis twice. Big upset. Not so much the victory, but the way he did it. Outpoints Bonavena over 12. He becomes champion by outpointing Jerry Quarry. Defends the belt against Floyd Patterson in the same year, 1968. Ellis is inactive for at least a year and 5 months after the Patterson bout. He was scheduled to have a big money fight with Henry Cooper at the Wembley Empire Pool, September 1969. Harry Levine, he was Henry Cooper's promoter, and Mickey Duff was the matchmaker. Cooper wasn't going to fight Joe Frazier, just too savage. His manager Jim Wicks back in the day said, "I want to let Henry on the same road as Sonny Liston." They weren't going to take on the big punching Americans, and they didn't go over to America and fight either. They took on Ali twice. The first fight was at Wembley Stadium, where Cooper floored Ali. Ali got back up and stopped him on cuts. That was in 1963. In Ali's next fight, he beat Sonny Liston in a massive upset to become heavyweight champion of the world. In 1966, there's a rematch where Ali's defending his title against Henry Cooper. This is at the Arsenal Football Stadium, Highbury, their old ground. Ali beats him on cuts again. Cooper's got some good victories, let's not get it twisted. Like, he beat Zora Foley, controversially. I remember watching the fight on TV. It was a bit controversial. Foley knocked him out in a rematch. Both these fights were in England. He fought Floyd Patterson at the Empire Pool, Wembley, and was knocked out again. You see, they saw it like Ali wasn't a concussive puncher, and they did nearly get Ali out of there, in all truth, in the first fight. So the likes of Sonny Liston and Frazier, nah, forget that. Them guys hit hard. But Jimmy Ellis was a middleweight who lost to Gene Fulmer's brother, Don Fulmer. Lost to Georgie Benton, Reuben Hurricane Carter, all on points at middleweight at 160. Henry Hank outpointed him at 160. So they figured they wouldn't be under that kind of threat against a middleweight turned heavyweight who's got a belt. This is a great opportunity to become champion. However, the WBA was not recognized by the British Boxing Board of Control. The board was affiliated to the WBC.
And it is even a greater pleasure for us because it was in 1963 that Great Britain, with 11 other countries, founded the World Boxing Council in Mexico.
The fight was on and off, then Cooper hurt his knee in training and then it was cancelled for good. Ellis was then scheduled to defend his title against Argentinian Gregorio Peralta in Argentina, but the fight was cancelled 24 hours before it was set to take place due to poor ticket sales. Jimmy Ellis is recognized by 41 states in the USA and many other countries as heavyweight champion of the world. Well, what about the other 11 states? Ali was recognized in all 52. In this edition of Boxing News in 1968, the British Boxing Board of Control still recognized Muhammad Ali as the world heavyweight champion and not Joe Frazier, despite Ali's enforced suspension from the sport following his refusal to fight in Vietnam. For those who don't know, Muhammad Ali had a great relationship with Britain. He thought they was way more fairer than the American press and media. And Britain, they really liked Ali. They really liked Ali. That's the truth. He was over here all the time, even when he wasn't fighting. Britain did not recognize Joe Frazier as champion, even after he beat Jimmy Ellis. When he fought Jimmy Ellis, the New York State Athletic Commission title that Joe Frazier had was on the line. The WBA title that Jimmy Ellis won in the tournament, that was on the line. The WBC, for the first time since 1967 when Ali retired, decided to sanction a heavyweight title fight. So they've got the WBC, WBA, the New York State Athletic Commission title, all on the line. Joe Frazier knocks out Jimmy Ellis in spectacular fashion. A frightening display of power punching, it has to be said. But even then, the British Boxing Board of Control and probably all them 11 states that didn't recognize Jimmy Ellis are still not convinced. Ali comes back in 1970. In 1971, he challenges Joe Frazier. In a classic fight, Ali is put on the canvas in the 15th round and loses a unanimous decision. And Joe Frazier is finally recognized, not only by the British Boxing Board of Control, but by the whole of America and by the world as undisputed heavyweight champion. And that's that. But let's rewind it back a little. Like I say, the New York State Athletic Commission, they go missing around 1949, 1950. Around that time period, they don't resurface until 1968 with Joe Frazier. Rocky Marciano retires with a perfect 49-0 record. His last defense was against Archie Moore at Yankee Stadium, the Bronx. 9th round knockout. Marciano was on the canvas himself in the second round. It's a great fight. He retires in 1955. Lineage is broken. Floyd Patterson takes up the slack in the 30th of November 1956 and knocks out Archie Moore for the vacant heavyweight title. Patterson made 4 successful defenses, lost the title in 1959 to Johansson, won it back in 1960 against Johansson. That fight was for the NBA title. They started sanctioning fights again. In his next fight, the rubber match with Ingemar Johansson, which he won by a KO again, that was sanctioned by the WBA, which is basically the NBA with a name change. So the first WBA world champion is Floyd Patterson. Patterson holds the belt until 1962, when he's ruthlessly dispatched by Sonny Liston in 1 round. And then in a rematch, 10 or 11 months later, the same thing happens again. Liston knocks him out in a round. Now, the WBA, they have some belts being auctioned off with Muhammad Ali's signature. But that doesn't mean they are the original belts that Muhammad Ali had for the WBA. And that doesn't mean they even gave Ali a belt in 1964 when he beat Liston. The belts they're auctioning off are replicas. The WBC was formed in 1962. And originally, the champions were awarded trophies in the shape of a globe. But during the 60s, they started awarding their champions with their first set of belts. They were black leather or satin belts with a silver medallion with the weight division written on it. So no, the first WBC belts were not green. So when you're screaming, oh, that green belt is the best belt, it wasn't always green, okay? I'm trying to find the origins of the WBA belt when they were first handed out. The common belief is that the WBC were handing out belts before the WBA. That's the common belief. But just like the WBA, there's a few smoke screens they've put out there. Like, they've used this picture of Miguel Canto, the flyweight champion. And though they're claiming that they started handing out title belts in the 60s, they've used this picture of Canto. Canto wasn't champion until the 70s. He won his first title in 1975. Had his first title attempt in 1973. So I want to see some pictures of some champions from the 60s, just to confirm it. Because I'm not sure when champions started getting sanctioning belts, and I'm not sure which organization were handing them out first either. Them belts that are being auctioned off are replicas with Ali's legitimate signature. Yeah, the signature's legitimate, but they're replicas. Just like the picture with Ernie Terrell, that's a replica belt. Let's go back to 1949 briefly. Here's Joe Louis giving Jake LaMotta a championship belt after he defeats Marcel Cerdan and becomes the middleweight champion, 16th of June 1949. Now, what sanctioning body is that? Is that the Ring Magazine? The NBA? The New York State Athletic Commission? Nope. That's the International Boxing Club. That's their belt. How legit is that belt? Remember, they're mob affiliated. Blinky Palermo, Frankie Carbo. Jake LaMotta had to throw a fight to get a title shot against Marcel Cerdan. What's Joe Louis doing there? Joe Louis used to work for the IBC. They paid him $100,000 to retire and work for them. Joe still ended up in debt and owed Uncle Sam a whole load of taxes. Now basically, we don't get them USBA title fights that we used to get back in the day. And they had some good title fights for American boxers. The USBA was formed in 1976. And they were aligned with the WBA. Now Robert Lee worked as a deputy commissioner for the New Jersey State Athletic Control Board. He was also involved with the USBA. Robert Lee had reached the position of second vice president of the WBA and ran for presidency in 1980 and lost. Now, I'm going to give you the cynical version. He wasn't happy that he didn't get the position. And that's when he was seeking for the USBA to break off and not just be an American sanctioning body, but be a worldwide sanctioning body. Their first champion was Marvelous Marvin Hagler. He was the undisputed middleweight champion, WBC and WBA champion. He made 12 defenses of the title. In 1983, he defended against Wilfred Sipien. That fight was just for the IBF title. The Sipien bout and the Leonard bout are the only time that Hagler doesn't have all the belts on the line. The WBA, they stripped Hagler before he faced Leonard because he wouldn't face Britain's Harold Graham. The IBF, they wouldn't sanction the bout, and they said if Hagler loses, the belt will be declared vacant. So when Hagler lost, Michael Olajide and Frank Tate, they fought for the vacant belt. Out of all Hagler's 3 belts, the WBC were the only sanctioning body who would sanction the fight. He was their first champion. Larry Holmes, he took the WBC title off Ken Norton in 1978. In his 17th defense against Marvis Frazier, the WBC refused to sanction the bout because Frazier was not ranked amongst their top 10. The fight was a mismatch. And when the WBC threatened to strip Holmes if he didn't defend against Greg Page, their number 1 contender, he relinquished the WBC title. Holmes wanted more than the $2.5 million that was being offered by promoter Don King to face Greg Page, and accepted recognition as the IBF heavyweight champion. Now the IBF with Hagler and Holmes had all the credibility they needed. Hagler was undisputed champion. Holmes was lineal champion. Bona fide lineal champion. No need to go through all these revisionist history standards that a lot of people are going through today. Bona fide lineal champion. Don Curry came shortly after Hagler and Holmes' early '84. He previously had the WBA belt, which he won from a Korean fighter, Wang Sok Kwang. Hope I ain't butchered it. In '83. The box rec doesn't tell you. Curry was on the floor. He got up. The guy was tough. The Korean was very tough. In a rematch with Marlon Starling in February, he defended the WBA title and picked up the vacant IBF title. He became undisputed champion in 1985 when he knocked out Milton McCrory, who was the WBC champion, in 2 rounds with a superb display of world championship fighting, it has to be said. One of the best welterweight performances I've seen. Incredible. Aaron Pryor, a light welterweight, he became WBA champion in 1980, knocking out a very good fighter in Antonio Cervantes. He made 8 defenses of that WBA belt, including 2 legendary fights against Alexis Arguello. Pryor had well-known substance abuse issues and was a troubled individual. Let's just leave it there. The WBA stripped him for inactivity. I couldn't find details if they stripped him because he didn't face a mandatory, or perhaps there's just a time limit on defending the belt, mandatory or voluntary, but they stripped him for inactivity. That's the most I could dig up. He was recognized by the IBF in '84, but by this time, Pryor wasn't the same fighter. He defended the IBF title twice, both fights going the 15-round limit, and it wasn't the same Aaron Pryor. He never lost the belts in the ring. He walked away from boxing for a couple of years and was stripped eventually. He came back to fight Bobby Joe Young and was knocked out. The fight was at welterweight, I believe. The WBO, they formed in 1988. I can read the whole biog, but I can't really be bothered. They're just a split-off group from the WBA, okay? Their first credible fighter to hold a belt was probably Tommy Hearns. He won the super middleweight title from James Kinchin. That was on the 4th of November, 1988. They didn't really have much stock in America, like saying on the Wikipedia page. Francesco Damiani, he fought Johnny Duplessis for the heavyweight title. Damiani won a silver medal at super heavyweight in the '94 Olympics, and Johnny Duplessis was just an okay South African fringe contender, let's just say. Damiani stopped him, but Mike Tyson was champion, so nobody considered Damiani anything, you know. There was no calls for Mike to unify against Damiani. Damiani was offered the fight by Don King. $1 million purse was turned down by Umberto Brancini, Damiani's manager. The WBO had such a bad name that when Germany's Darius Mikuchelski unified against Virgil Hill, the WBA stripped him just because he had a WBO belt. They stripped him because of that. Today, they have way more legitimacy than they did back then. And it's hard to believe that they're based in San Juan, Puerto Rico, when they've had so much success in Europe. The WBO's key to success was not trying too hard to compete with the WBC and WBA in America and going out to other territories, Europe being one of them. Ray Mercer, remember when he vacated the belt, the WBO belt, and then got totally schooled by Larry Holmes? It kind of exposed the WBO belt right there. I mean, Larry Holmes was old. I remember when Michael Mora, when he started as a pro, he won a WBO light heavyweight belt early, and some of them defenses he had were appalling. He even had a spell as WBO champion as heavyweight, and the same thing, just appalling opponents. Although the Burt Cooper Mora fight was excellent. Henry Akinwande, he got hold of a WBO belt, but he blew it against Lennox. He got DQ'd. And just like Mikuchelski, the WBC wouldn't unify their belt with the WBO. He had to drop it to fight Lennox.
And now for my next number, I'd like to return to the classics. And now for my next number, I'd like to return to the classics. And now for my next number, I'd return